Hello and welcome to Game Objective. My name is Brad Glasgow, and today I have a story for you about what happens when the editor-in-chief of a gaming website has a run-in with the social justice crowd on Twitter. Spoiler alert, it's not pretty. Russ Pitts was the editor-in-chief of Escapist magazine, formerly known as The Escapist, after having purchased the website with some partners back in July of 2018. Note that I said that he was the editor-in-chief, because as of today, that's no longer the case. He just announced that he's taking a leave of absence from his position at The Escapist, and he's resigning from his position at Take This, a charity that he started and served on as chair of the board. What happened that forced him to take such drastic measures? Well, he wrote an editorial trying to talk about ethics in game journalism. For those of you who don't know, ethics in game journalism is a tagline used to describe the Gamergate controversy. Gamergate was a controversy that started in 2014, where a bunch of gamers became upset at gaming media, and they argued that they were fighting for ethics in game journalism. Those who oppose Gamergate, however, say that it was using ethics in game journalism as a smokescreen to cover for the harassment of women in gaming, including rape threats, death threats, doxing, etc. At ground zero of Gamergate is the woman whose alleged affairs supposedly started it all. Her name is Zoe Quinn. We'll get back to her in a moment. Russ Pitts posted his editorial titled, "How Do We Finally Talk About Ethics?" He spends the first several paragraphs talking about Gamergate. Quote, "People were doxxed, bullied, harassed, threatened, actually assaulted, swatted, forced to relocate or change jobs, and flat out terrorized during Gamergate. Pretending an enormous, motivated group that relished in making other people hurt didn't exist or was exaggerated not only insults its victims, but is simply unreasonable and illogical." So that part is your typical anti-Gamergate writing that we've heard from hundreds of different op-ed writers before. And by the way, I've personally done years of research into Gamergate, and I have not seen any evidence that anyone has ever been, quote, actually assaulted during Gamergate. Other than that, despite whether you agree with him or not, the real kicker comes next, because this is where he gets into trouble. Quote, "Put simply, someone involved with Gamergate may have cared about ethics, but the movement was about hurting people." That right there, an admission from a writer that at least some people involved in Gamergate may have actually cared about ethics, that's what got Russ Pitts into trouble. On Twitter, there are a lot of people very much into this notion of social justice. A lot of those people are in game development, especially indie game development, and every major gaming media site is also an adherent to this far-left ideology. And even mentioning the notion that possibly, maybe, some people in Gamergate cared about real issues, well, to people who believe in social justice, those words are poison. In their minds, saying such a thing adds legitimacy to Gamergate, which they view as nothing but pure evil. So the social justice mob went after Russ Pitts on Twitter for his heresy. Russ Pitts responded to this mob on Twitter saying, quote, "Some folks are trying obsessively, inconceivably hard to find a collection of words or phrases or even an anagram that points to my being on the side of Gamergate. Spoiler, it's not there." And now we come back to Zoe Quinn. Zoe Quinn, quote, tweeted that response from Russ Pitts, saying, quote, "You literally revived a Gamergate hub of a website and didn't bother contacting me or anyone else I know who actually was at the center of Gamergate for this piece. You definitely aren't not on the side of people who got slammed by it the hardest either." And here comes the spicy part. For a brief moment in time, Russ Pitts discovered his courage. He replied to Zoe, quote, "Sorry, Zoe, I genuinely thought you'd probably be over this being all about you. I'll be sure to check in next time." Ouch. They went back and forth like this on Twitter for a few tweets, with Zoe angry that Pitts even took over The Escapist, because the name is tainted for her because they were allegedly pro-Gamergate. It should be noted that during this Twitter spat, a lot more people came to Zoe's defense than came to Pitt's defense. Pitts was on the outs with social justice Twitter. And that was all the courage that Pitts could muster, because about an hour later he replied to Zoe Quinn with an apology. Quote, "Having taken the time to consider that I should have taken before I wrote the above, I'm really sorry I delegitimized your experience as a survivor of trauma and suggested that you should get over it. That was dumb and horrible, and you're right to call me on it." He then publicly apologized. Quote, "Hey folks, this was a bad way to express a bad thought. It did not occur to me how this would sound to a survivor of trauma, nor how dumb a thing this was to say to Zoe in particular. I'm really sorry. Horrible lapse in judgment. You're right to call me on it." Zoe was not what you would call gracious in her victory. She replied, quote, "Please leave me alone like I literally just asked you to. I'm not down to be apologized to just so you can offload your guilt and feel better. If you're actually sorry, you should take a step back and ask yourself who this apology actually helps. Not me. I asked you to leave me be." And step back is exactly what he did. They took down the editorial from the Escapist and they replaced it with an apology the next day. "I'm going to be off Twitter for some time," he said. "I'll have more to say soon about the future and how I and Escapist Magazine will learn and grow from all this in the days ahead. I love you all." True to his word, he stayed off of Twitter until a few days later, on Monday, February 11th, he announced that he was taking a leave of absence as the editor-in-chief of The Escapist, and, as I mentioned earlier, he's also resigning his position from the charity that he started. Quote, "Hopefully, I may also find some meaningful way to use my words again for good instead of harm."
Fatality.
And that's pretty much it. The editor-in-chief and part owner of a somewhat popular gaming website had the gall to write an editorial asking for a reasonable discussion about ethics in game journalism. The next day, he had to delete his editorial, replace it with an apology, and a few days later, he left his position at a charity and the website so that he can go off and think about what he did. Now, I know many of you are knowledgeable about this crazy world of video game journalism, and I am too, but I have to tell you, I will never not be shocked by the sheer insanity that goes on here. I'm honestly not quite sure what to make of it. It's something I hope I never get used to. I mean, this is completely abnormal. First, I think that we saw the true Russ Pitts there for a minute when he actually stood up for himself. Because he was right there with that tweet. This isn't all about Zoe Quinn. We should be able to talk about journalistic ethics in the game industry without it turning into some virtue slap fight. But apparently not. The utter domination and submission of Russ Pitts, it's shocking. And I want to feel sorry for the guy, but how can you when he won't stand up for himself? And now, the Escapist is in a no man's land. They have committed serious crime against the woke community, and they are not known for their forgiveness. But their apology and these moves are all designed to appeal to those people. That's not going to happen. And how can people who are not woke, who tend to be reasonable and rational, who don't follow silly Twitter fights, how can they ever respect the guy after this? I don't think I can. And the worst thing about all of this is that this is no doubt going to embolden Zoe Quinn and others like her. You see in her tweets how she complained that Russ Pitts had the audacity to run an editorial without consulting her. She even disapproved of him purchasing the website. And this isn't the first time that she's done this. She attempted to have Tim Soray, the creator of The Last Night, deplatformed from E3. You can see that in my video about The Last Night. Who the hell elected Zoe Quinn the queen of what gets to be talked about and what does not? Unfortunately, right now, the answer to that question is Russ Pitts, because he just bent the knee, and then he bent the other knee, and then he groveled some more. Way to go, Russ Pitts. You could have stood up and taken a stand for reasonable discourse. Instead, your sheer cowardice diminishes the possibility that we'll ever be able to have a mature, reasonable discussion and bring gamers together. Finally, we are left with one really interesting question, and unfortunately, it's a question we'll likely never get a real answer to. What happened? What happened to Russ Pitts that changed his thought process from one where he was actually defending himself and defending his own words that he wrote and presumably believes, and turned him into this groveling, self-flagellating, broken shell of a man? The way I see it, there are a couple of possibilities. One, industry people that he likes or respects came to the defense of Zoe Quinn. Maybe they threatened him and said that they would not respond to their coverage anymore. Maybe they won't give him any more review codes. You don't know. Number two, his team turned on him. When Pitts and his team bought the Escapist, he said that they would, quote, leave politics at the door, which everyone knew was BS, and everyone was right, because one of the first people to jump on the team was Movie Bob Chipman, who is very strongly on the side of social justice. And then they even brought on board Noah Berlatsky, who is as hardcore social justice as it comes. They did publicly disagree with Pitts, but could they have privately threatened to quit? And number three, was it just the sheer volume of hate that he was getting from the social justice mob? Maybe it was a combination of those three. As I said, we'll never know what actually broke Russ Pitts. All we're left with is a website that the hardcore left will never forgive, and the reasonable people can likely never respect. That's what I think. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. I am very interested to hear what you all have to say on the matter. I don't get to respond to all the comments, but I do read them all. As always, don't forget that you can support my work through Patreon or PayPal using the links below. I promise you I will never apologize for speaking the truth. Until next time, this has been Brad Glasgow for Game Objective. Thanks for watching.